Boom. Test, test, test.
Okay.
Yep. Looks good.
Well done. If you've made it this far, this is part 8 of the Tokyo Jazz Joint's 5 Days in June series. The journey's nearly over. We hope you enjoy it. So, we finally arrived at day 5, and as I said previously, you would have thought in a more common sense and logical approach that day 5 would be day 5 would be a wind down, just easing into the end of the trip. But no, incredibly, I would say out of the 5 days, this was far and away the most hectic and the most exciting in terms of the things not only that we discovered, but also the way that we went about it. And I don't remember exactly, James, when we kicked off the day, but I do know that we headed out in absolutely torrential rainpour and drove for a fair distance, I would say maybe 45 minutes or so, to go to one place that we had kind of discovered when we were down there. Now, unfortunately, when we got there, we came through a tunnel on a highway. We pulled into the right, and sadly, it was closed. It was advertised as a kisa, but it did look almost like a sort of a dining type place as well. It was quite big, just off the roadside, like I say. And unfortunately, the best that we got was a peer through the window. And I think you got out of the car, did you? I wasn't really that keen because it was absolutely tipping it down.
Yeah, I jumped out. I took a quick look just inside. It was, as you said, it was along a highway. And you know, this rainstorm, not just a torrential downpour, but we drove east from Fukuoka into the mountainous areas back into Oitaken again. And so there were definitely a few precarious moments in the car where I was gripping the door handle very tightly. That's not a reflection of your driving skills, just the weather.
We left that place, James. I mean, I've got it in there just before 11 a.m., which, and I know they say hindsight is 20/20 vision, but it does make me wonder, just did we start maybe slightly too late in the day? I mean, obviously, the way that we planned each day was often to do with opening hours. And of course, you know, there's not many places opening at like 8 or 9 in the morning like you'd expect coffee shops to do. So we obviously had a slightly more leisurely start to the day, but it definitely put us on the back foot. And then for some reason or other, I suppose just because we were down in that region and because it's famed for it, before we got to our first place, we took a little detour, didn't we?
We did. We took a detour into the lovely valley of Beppu. Beppu, very, very famous for just dozens and dozens of hot springs.
Oh, yeah.
Also a very famous golf tournament, but we weren't there for the golf. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of strange, Philip, because I think, you know, as you said, we did have to plan the day when even the earliest of Jazz Kisaten would open, say, 11 or about 12. And as we discussed, we were putting in some pretty heavy days and nights, so a little bit of a sleep in was certainly in order. But I do remember being a little worried about, you know, although I do love stopping in onsens, that maybe we were being too ambitious with all the places we wanted to visit, and not having got into anywhere until, you know, after lunch. But we stopped into the onsen. I don't know if you remember this, but, you know, it was quite packed in the lobby area. A lot of tourists. I remember we stood in line in the back of a whole bunch of Korean tourists. There were some English-speaking people scattered around. And we went in, and in Japanese they call it rotenburo, which is a sort of an outdoor bath. It's a stone bath where you're outside. So you're sitting in the bath, the steam is rising, and you're looking up into the trees. Sometimes you got a very nice view. And I think it really did wonders for our energy and our spirits, because I came out of there feeling ready to rock on, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've got a couple of photos there. I don't know if you remember, there's this gorgeous green shrine, very unusual, but even the torii gate was painted green just outside the onsen. And then I have also got a great video, which I'll be posting on social media, of you looking really, really sketchy as you're sort of staring around the gift shop.
Sketchy.
There's
No,
a nice kabuki face mask sort of foregrounded as well.
I was in deep concentration because I was perplexed. I didn't know whether I should make a purchase of this bottle of Bayou shampoo, which was a local product. Bayou is horse hair oil shampoo. I'd heard of this, but I was a little put off by the horse angle, and unbelievably, I'm still using that shampoo today. I order it online. The best shampoo I've ever had. Don't be put off by the horse one.
Apologies to any of our vegan listeners, but we're all different. So after we'd been showered, washed, suitably bathed, and we headed out from Beppu. And it's funny, just looking on the map, we literally this day, we only took in the kind of top northeast corner of Fukuoka, and we basically did a loop from Fukuoka south over to the east coast of the island, and then up around the top and back towards Fukuoka. And so when you look at it on a map again, it's it's a deceptively small area, but it did in fact take us the whole day. And actually, rather than heading north from Beppu, we'd kind of found a place that had popped up on a map, and it was the name was written as Naima, which obviously, most listeners will know is the name of John Coltrane's first wife. And I think that really piqued our interest. And I would say, James, probably from all the places that we've been on this journey so far, it was probably the most successful gamble that we've ever taken, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, considering that we knew nothing of the place, had never heard of it before, hadn't really done much research about that side of the island, because I think it was a late decision to go there. We were going to stay more towards the Fukuoka Kyushu part of the island for this last day. So it was definitely a big risk. And I mean, it was like winning the lottery pulling up to this place, man. Do you remember that sort of feeling? Like, we turned the corner and saw the sign, and I think we both kind of just went like, because we didn't know anything about it.
I just totally, I remember, it was a very industrial sort of area. Again, we were in a kind of a suburban neighborhood, and just turned that corner, and in front of Naima was this empty car parking lot, and then obviously this huge sign on the street with Coltrane's face on it. And then, of course, that very unique, almost kind of like square pyramid roof with a slightly sunken body of the house. And I mean, it was just, again, one of those places that, like, it's hard to imagine living in a suburb like in Dublin and looking out your window and seeing a building or a jazz place like that, and just very, very unusual.
Well, the building was certainly very unique. I found out later, I mean, clearly it was some sort of, kind of storage facility that the owner had acquired and then turned it into, basically just, turned it into his cafe. There were so many things about Naima that were amazing. And right away, we got a big surprise when we walked in, because there was a lady, fairly youngish lady. We walked in and she immediately turned to us and said in perfect English, "Hi, good morning. What are you guys doing here?" And we were just like, "What?" This is literally the first time that's ever happened. It turned out her name was Michael. She is a drummer, and she lives in the United States. Her Japanese husband, I think he's some sort of university professor in New Jersey. So she grew up playing the drums with her father, who runs the joint, Uchiyama-san. And she also does, she plays gigs in the tri-state area in the States. So she was back for the summer to visit her parents. She was there with her little daughter, who was, running around the place with their dog. Very, very homey atmosphere. So we had a great chat with her, and she was so excited that we were doing the project and came to her parents' place. Unfortunately, we didn't get to meet the dad. He was out doing some errands and shopping that morning, but we did have a coffee with Michael and her mother and her daughter, 3 generations of jazz Kisaten family staff. And, like you said, the building's so unique. It's kind of sunken down, but when you're in there, the ceiling is very, very high. And there's a kind of like a loft space there as well, which you obviously went up to take a picture from, and catching all the sofas and the bookshelves and whatnot. Just a very unique space.
very unusual, because it has this, the ground floor is this made from breeze blocks, and then obviously you have this beautiful kind of vaulted wooden roof. And yeah, you're right. I did get up into that attic.
What are those things called again, Philip? Those long things along the roof?
Beams.
Oh, right. Yes, beams. Yes. Good. Yes.
If anyone from Beams is listening, by the way, we're looking for a sponsor. Anyway, just a very, very unique space. They had this fantastic sort of paper mache head, sort of mask head type thing for a festival up in that roof space. Obviously, the instruments there, as you can see. And like you say, there's a way to look down then onto the kind of main sofa area where the amp is. And obviously then that poster that suddenly seemed to be appearing everywhere.
Yes,
Sonny Rollins dressed as a samurai.
You can see on there a little easier than in the other photo from yesterday's chat we had. That's his tour where he came down to Kyushu. To Miyazaki is another prefecture in Kyushu. So obviously these posters were a hot commodity for that tour, as they should be, because they're wonderful. But yeah, Naima, look at the he's got his amp. There's a lot of CDs and records as well. And do you remember like how many books were in the place that were just sort of there that people could kind of sit down and browse through? And those weren't even all jazz books, like places like Milestone that we talked about that have like a jazz library of old magazines. It was just random books that he had put in. So a very, very homey kind of feel to Naima. And when we were talking with Michael, I don't know if you remember this, you might have been taking the pictures, but she said that they did have a bit of a problem getting new customers. It seemed to be just the regulars who knew the joint. But by doing live gigs, they could get people to come who, maybe didn't know too much about jazz, but knew them in the neighborhood and wanted to come and check out and see, well, what kind of music is this? Or, what is Uchiyama-san doing? So a very warm, open place that I we say this a lot, but really I was quite speechless when we walked in there because we had no idea of what the place was, and we've never seen one in this kind of like shape before.
Yeah, it was a staggering find. I'm not claiming that obviously that we were the first people to discover it, but certainly from our perspective and not having had it on the list initially, it was definitely a very, very good investment in terms of the time and making that detour. Having said that, of course, it did then sort of put a little bit more pressure on the rest of the day. So, we finished up at 9.
Stayed a while. I think we stayed about an hour longer than we obviously would have planned, and longer than we stayed in some other places, just because it was so great, and we were obviously having a long chat in English too. So by the time we left, we would have been 2:00, I guess.
Yeah, well, I've got sort of the outside there photographing it by this point it was 4:00, if you can believe. So wow. Really, we really were, I had imagined this all to have happened much earlier in the daytime, but clearly it really didn't. So once we finished with Oita, we headed up that coast. There's a kind of a peninsula that sticks out to the east. We went straight across that and headed for, again, the third groovy of the trip, and by no means the third groovy in all of Japan, in a place called Nakatsu. And again, this was a really quite a unique space in the sense that it was a family home, and also it bordered onto a school playground. So through the back windows of the cafe area, you could actually see this kind of classic Japanese junior high school baseball type space, and the high fences to kind of keep the balls in and so on. And again, once we arrived at this place, there was just a couple of old guys in there, neighborhood regulars, sitting having a chat, and I think the last thing they were expecting was for us to rock up.
Oh, they were completely gobsmacked when we walked in. I remember they all went silent, and as soon as we spoke Japanese to them, they had a smile, and they were like, "Oh, wow, what are you guys doing here? Are you visiting someone?" And I think by this point I was starting to get a bit cheeky, as you would say, And I just said, like, yeah, we came to visit you. We drove all the way here to visit you. You know, that's why we're in Nakatsu City. And they just kind of couldn't believe it. You know, I think we didn't tell them too much about the project. You know, we just said that, oh, it was a hobby of ours, driving around. We're taking pictures. We may want to make a book, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's kind of hard to explain just in the first 5 minutes when you come in, when you get that reaction. But I remember being kind of knocked out by, again, how big this house was. I mean, this is easily 3 times to 4 times bigger than any house you're going to find around here in the Tokyo metro area.
Yeah.
Of course, that kind of that weird like tennis court that it opens out to. But all of the decor in Groovy was great, especially, you know, that picture you got of the owner, where that sort of double bass is up on the wall with, you know, obviously somebody took the time to put Groovy on there. Whether that's stenciled in or not, but it's gorgeous. And look at his T-shirt. I mean, do you think he has any idea of what that T-shirt means? I mean, clearly he bought that in some American sort of like thrift shop type, you know, the kind that's in Shimokitazawa or something where they sell these.
I just assumed that he was a plumber in a previous existence. No, are you telling me that T-shirt is he's wearing that unknowingly?
For our non-American listeners, I mean, these are the kind of shirts you see all around the United States that small businesses will make, and for a lot of complex reasons, they'll sell for like $50 in Japan in Japanese sort of hipster stores. But where this guy got one of those, I have no idea. I mean, he couldn't speak a word of English, you know. But we did have a really good chat about the jazz. He was very impressed that I knew the Cannibal Adderley record that he was playing. I wonder if he thought that maybe because we were younger that we weren't like serious fans.
Yeah, and I think actually, you know, we found that a lot. Probably haven't touched on it much during the podcast, but you know, we've covered the idea of being able to speak Japanese. Obviously, definitely facilitates the project, and you know, it makes it a lot easier in some cases, particularly when it comes to asking to take pictures and so on and so forth, because you can really clarify what you're doing. But also, I do think, you know, there's times that I feel like, you know, we've been tested ever so slightly. You know, they do throw out questions and ask you what kind of stuff that you're into, and for some of the owners definitely have that interest. You know, they want to know that you're actually interested in the jazz culture side of it as well, and not just obviously the Japanese angle. And we haven't come up too wanting, I don't think, at any point that I remember, but
no, not at all. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely, I remember a little bit of chat with him and one of the old guys on the counter about like, yeah. Oh, you guys know this record, you know, because they clearly bought it when it came out, you know, in the early 70s. And so, yeah, like you said, you kind of have to prove a little bit, prove your knowledge and show that you love the music, and then you get that respect. But this was another one that was a real surprise. I think we had it on our original itinerary, but there wasn't anything online about this place that we could really find, like information like when it was open or the guy's name or any reviews from the usual jazz bloggers. So another great surprise. And do you remember like that the back street where it was on? And I mean, Nakatsu City is not a very large city on the coast of Kyushu, but this was particularly in a quiet neighborhood. I mean, there was nobody on the street. It was just houses, completely dead. And another incidence of us kind of getting lost for a few minutes looking for it.
Yeah, and I mean the entranceway itself is just absolutely beautiful, you know, with the no-end curtain out and this kind of wooden veranda, and then of course just off to the right as well, you know, those really old traditional Japanese style houses, and I mean really intact roofs on all those buildings. So it's a very unusual location for this place. And you know, it took us, just to contextualize again the distance, you said previously, you know, about how mountainous some of the terrain is, and you know, from Oita, again, it looks like a stone's throw on a map, but it was actually, we drove for over an hour to get to Nakatsu. So each of these places, particularly as we reached the end of the trip, you know, there was definitely an element of gamble, because if we went to one place or went too far out of our way, and you know, we're kind of disappointed, then you know, the chances are maybe it was going to have a knock-on effect on the rest of the day. But as we worked our way up that coast, it was great that we did stop in Nakatsu. And you know, by this stage it was getting to about 5 o'clock in the evening, and we still had a fair few places on the list. So where do we head next after Nakatsu?
Well, we headed up, continued along the coastal highway, in between the water and the mountains, and we arrived in the top of Kyushu Island. a very industrial city, which does not have always the best reputation for livability or beauty. And it's a city called Kyushu, well known for its port and for a lot of automotive factories. Foreign companies have factories there, so definitely kind of not a tourist spot. But as with all Japanese cities, a couple of good jazz joints. So we knew that we had to drive up there. I wasn't. I was pretty impressed with Kyushu. I didn't think it was as bad as some of the locals might say. I mean, in comparison to Fukuoka, maybe it's a little gray, but it's a nice city on the water there. So we raced to the next cafe, and this was yet again another real surprise. So we're back into the city now. It's a place called Rokuyokan Gig, Jazz in Rokuyokan Gig, which is a little hard to translate.
It's a nightmare. It's literally the worst name of any of the places we've been in terms of just trying to recount it. I psyched myself out the other day just as I was going through the notes. I was like, no, wait, is that how you like write in the alphabet? No, wait, what? Very odd name.
And Philip, do you remember, in a trip full of surprises, in a trip full of unexpected delights and sometimes disappointment, but do you remember the stunning surprise when we walked in here?
I do. I mean, I think it's the only time in the history so far of Tokyo Jazz Joints where there's been a welcoming party. So if you've been listening to previous episodes of this trip, and hopefully you have, in one of the other days, we mentioned, of course, that when we went to Riverside, the owner there was particularly active, despite perhaps what you would think just by looking at the photos of him. He was very active on social media, and he had spread the word around Kyushu with different owners. And of course, when we arrived in this place, the owner was waiting for us. He knew we were coming. He didn't know when, but he was expecting us to arrive. And thank God that we actually went there, because how disappointed would he have been?
Oh, he would have been so disappointed. And he was so lovely, man. He was such an awesome guy. You can see from the photos. I mean, it's a big place. All of these places in Kyushu are bigger than the average place in Tokyo. It's funny because the interior is a little bit similar to 8 Modern, where we were previous day in Kurume City. It's kind of got that mixture of tea salon with the chairs and the curtains and a lot of like weird antiques, but tons of music as well. He's got live gigs in there along the back wall. You could see the piano was covered up when we visited. And as you said, he was waiting for us. And, obviously not too many, pairs of foreign guys with cameras and notebooks are popping into these jazz joints. So he knew right away when we walked in. He sat down to talk with us. And you can tell from the picture you got, which I love for a cajillion reasons. First, his, Tamura-san, I think is his name, but his nickname on the Japanese jazz blogs is Mr. Smokin', because he pretty much lives with a cigarette between his fingers, which may explain why this Rokuyokan was closed earlier in the year in 2018 when we visited. He was closed for a couple months because he was in bad health. Obviously, he got better. He's still on the smokes, as you could see. But look at the smile. Look at the warmth in his eyes. Look at the hat and T-shirt. Again, for our American listeners, I mean, he's wearing a Nebraska Cornhuskers T-shirt. College football is not a popular sport in Japan, so I can only assume that he would have gotten this as some sort of souvenir. And he's wearing like a U.S. Navy hat, so clearly he's got an American thing going on. But very unlikely he would know what a Cornhusker was, or even know where Nebraska was on a map. But I love that he was wearing the T-shirt. I loved his place. You could see that he didn't really make any effort to, it was just open when we got there, and you could see a lot of still used dishes on the counter behind him, which I think would have been there from the previous day.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Just a fantastic spot. And good breaking news again. I looked it up online. They are still open and he's still putting on some live gigs. He was putting live gigs on up until October. So I don't know how the COVID situation is down in Kyushu. People need to remember that Japan is, it's the 4 main islands, and each island was sort of having their own, situation in terms of the COVID pandemic. So, but he had gigs going on until very recently.
Wow. The Navy hat as well is a nice touch. The U.S. Navy hat as well, just in case the message wasn't clear from the Nebraska Huskers T-shirt. This place is mad. I mean, from outside, it doesn't look like a jazz place at all. Like you say, it's got that sort of restaurant-y, bistro-y feel with these kind of weird little street lamps. And then, of course, in huge letters, you've got this hard bop and funky jazz. In English written on the side. And yeah, I mean, an absolute gent. He was really excited for us to be there, very accommodating. We had a bit of a chat. He came outside, showed us the exterior and stuff, posed for this photograph, and another amazing place. And like you say as well, again, a lot of wood. And you're right, definitely down there, not only in the beams on the roof, but also, just the fittings as well. So much more wood, and it seems to be a feature of the places down there. Look at the covers on those chairs in the portrait of him. They've not seen a laundrette for a long time, have they? A dry cleaners for a long time.
I think I have a picture, and as you mentioned, we'll try to get all of the sort of outtake pictures up onto the social media feeds. A picture of the payphone near the bathroom.
I was just going to say the payphone. Yeah. The old payphone, the one you hold up and go, 234.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if that. I mean, surely that couldn't work anymore. But I mean, it's a great spot. All the little details in here. I mean, the piano there, the TV up behind where the band would play. So I'm assuming that sometimes he's showing some live DVDs, and he's got framed albums. I took a couple pictures, of course, of that Grant Green album up on the top right. I loved everything about this joint, and it was again one of those ones that I think we added to the list fairly, maybe just a day or two before the trip. And I found out since then, I've talked to some musicians here in the Tokyo region, and they've said that he's been putting on live gigs for years, even before this cafe was taken over. He used to put them on somewhere else. So I think the guy is very well connected, and it kind of made more sense that he and the guy from Riverside would have been communicating. It surprised me that they were on Facebook. I mean, these dudes got to be in their 70s, right? But yeah. I guess they've adapted to the new way of communicating. So
I mean, we've got to contextualize. You're talking about Facebook as the new way of communicating, which just shows where you fall on the social media spectrum.
Listen, you know what I feel about Facebook, but we'll keep that for another podcast. James's editorial outtakes, Volume 3. Yeah.
So I mean, by this point, it's sort of early evening. It's gone 6 o'clock,
and I started, I think, on the beer at this place, which probably should be mentioned due to what's going to be coming up.
And
you were on your fifth cup of coffee at least.
Yeah, I was really at this point. I was really buzzing. But we had I think 4 more places that we'd planned to go to, because of course you'll remember from a previous episode that we also wanted to return to Coltrane that we hadn't got into on a previous day. So the next place, visually for me, what really sticks out in my mind is this kind of really warm red glow that it has. And if you've already seen the photographs online, you'll know that I'm talking about Jazz Street 52. But I would say, in contrast with that warm glow of the place and the ambience and atmosphere of the joint itself, we got a very chilly reception from the owner to start with, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Extremely chilly. Really not interested in talking. I couldn't quite figure out why. Sometimes you just run into it. Sometimes the guys are a bit grumpy. They had a bad day, whatever.
But I remember actually, James. I think you put your head in first, and as I remember it, you said, "Are you open?" Obviously in Japanese, and he said, "Yeah." And, you kind of, at that point, you expect usually this kind of so please come in, welcome, yes, or whatever. Yes. But actually, it was just very much, are you open? Yep. And so I remember you looking around at me, and it was like, okay, so he is open. So, and then I think we said something like, "So, are we okay to come in?" At which point he sort of grunted and begrudgingly invited us in. And then, like you say, it was definitely it was chilly, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think after a while kind of picked up on it, and your portrait of him, which I really love. The lighting is just great there in this place. It's very different to a lot of the places we've been. It's very much a bar. It's not a cafe at all. It's very much a bar, jazz bar. But his name is Hayashi-san. Kind of picked up that he has had some serious health problems. And I think you can kind of capture that. You can kind of see that in the portrait you took of him.
Yeah.
He's pushing in his late 70s, I believe. I think he was 78. But he's definitely had a few health issues. But what happened was we sat down at the bar, we ordered a drink, and I just thought, okay, we can't mess around with the usual sort of like slow method because we're on such a tight schedule. So I immediately just jumped in and said, we flew down from Tokyo, and we go around taking pictures of jazz joints. And, we just came from, I believe I told him that we just came from Rokyokan. And he kind of like opened his eyes like, "Oh, you went there?" And I said, yeah. And, and just miraculously, I looked down, and do you remember the photo that's on the bar is a photo of him with Nakadaira-san from Doug in Shinjuku, which is the sort of ground zero of all jazz kisaten in Japan, where so many people who went to college in the Tokyo region would hang out, go to the gigs there, and Nakadaira-san became quite a well-known figure. And it turns out that Hayashi-san and Nakadaira-san are extremely close friends. So when we said that, of course, we've met with Nakadaira at Doug and have been there many times, his manner changed completely, and he started to talk to us at length about his whole story. And it was amazing.
And I thought, I can't remember if we mentioned Sugawara-san from Basie as well, but just for context, for people who are not familiar, these three were kind of peers back in the heyday in the late 60s of the jazz kisa in Tokyo, and the three of them actually met there, and then eventually they moved back to their own regions to open their own places. Nakadaira-san obviously stayed in Tokyo and opened up in Shinjuku, but like you say, it was like someone hit a switch, because he went from this kind of slightly frosty, and again, there's no reason why he should be anything else, but there was no other customers there, so there's no reason not to sort of chat to us or anything. But once he realized that we'd been to these places, and he saw that kind of sincerity of the project and what we were actually up to, he just totally transformed and just chatted away. And so in some ways, that portrait of him, he looks a little smaller than I remember, and a little more somber, but actually he was chatting away and talking to us the whole time that we were there.
Oh yeah, he thought it was completely, and that, like you said, so he, being from down south in Kyushu, Sugawara-san from Basie being up north in Tohoku, and you could just imagine now, and those two guys are roughly the same age. And Nakadaira-san, who was about 7 or 8 years older, was kind of like, it's not quite mentor in English, but there's a phrase in Japanese called senpai, which sort of means like a mentor or a senior. And Nakadaira-san, who was the owner of the cafe, only maybe in his late 20s, but would have been, the senior to these guys. And so when they left Tokyo and went back to their regional hometowns and opened jazz kisaten of their own, they still would look up to Nakadaira-san. And he told me such a sweet thing. He said that he still calls him once a week to check on him, because Nakadaira-san has also had some health issues. He's 87 this year. And I just thought it was just so sweet, because, how often can they get together? Maybe once a year in Tokyo. They've got their own, obviously, businesses to run and their own gigs to put on. But that was a story. Again, we were not expecting this. And it just kind of, it really added a sort of touching element to the whole thing,
Absolutely, yeah, and I have that picture of the three of them in their younger days together, and I'll make sure I post that on social media when this episode goes up. Yeah, of course, you sneaked into one of the photographs there as well, as you probably noticed. I know you're a great fan at looking for yourself.
Well,
in some of these
I
images.
kind of like that very sort of serious posture I have there, where I'm engaged in hardcore Japanese conversation while you just get to flit around and take a few pictures. I mean, definitely
sure
I've got
you've
the
noticed
harder
the
job
beautiful-
of the two of us, but.
I'm sure you've noticed the beautiful framing of the symmetry between your cap peak facing left and the cap peak of this picture facing right.
Yes,
I know you appreciate those kind of
surely deliberate. Breaking news. You might remember this, that he told us it was the 50th anniversary of the bar when we were there. But did you know that about 2 months afterwards, they held a gigantic party at a hotel in Kyushu to celebrate Jazz Street 52. Now, that's unusual because think about it. This is a small jazz bar in a regional mid-sized city. 50th anniversary is a big deal. And in Japan, anniversaries are particularly big. I mean, they often have a lot of events around them for anything. But not only did they have the party at the hotel, but there was a live gig. And the gig featured Yamashita Yosuke, Hino Terumasa, and Watanabe Kazumi. I mean, these are three of the absolute giants of Japanese jazz. So it kind of shows you how well connected Hayashi-san and like that network of jazz Kisaten owner is. Very, very interesting because, we just came from a different place like, Groovy Nakatsu, which is very local, where those guys were clearly not hanging out with Japanese jazz stars,
Yeah.
And then Hayashi-san has his 50th anniversary party, and he gets three of the most famous musicians in the country to play it in Kyushu. I mean, what would you have given to go to that gig? Wow.
I know, right? It's one of the most beautiful places inside. I mean, the walls, as you can see, are covered with jazz memorabilia. I mean, there's huge posters there, signed Bill Evans, of course, fairly standard image. And then, you've got Art Blakey next to that. And it's just a gorgeous place, and then such a contrast to the exterior, because of course if you look at that, it's this very grey, very sort of characteristic corridor of lots of Japanese apartment buildings, just the 52 to indicate it, and then you open the door to this beautiful brown and leather warm red space with all this jazz and all this history.
Yes.
And it's a gorgeous place. So
it was fantastic. Yeah,
and I mean,
he covered in posters too of those gigs that he helped to put on. You can see some of them in the long shot you got of the room.
And ordinarily, of course, we would have probably spent the rest of the evening there. But
completely.
As I've said a few times now, we were definitely on a schedule. And the next place that we had planned to head to was the curiously named L. Evans. Now, by this stage, James, it was about 8 o'clock, and we were still in that Kita-Kyushu area. I remember just a bit of a mad dash to there, dropping the car off. And then, do you remember walking down this empty Shotengai, this shopping, covered shopping alleyway to get to L. Evans? You remember that?
Well, yes. And, what we didn't know at the time, and that what I found out later by doing some research, was why that was. The neighborhood this was in, on the north part of Kita-Kyushu, a neighborhood called Wakamatsu, which, let's just put it, has seen better days. I mean, this was a Tuesday night in the summer, and it was as if it was like a ghost town. It was like the way places look now, during a pandemic. It was insane. And I remember thinking, like, I don't think we're going to make it. I actually said to you, I think we should drop this place and just go.
Yeah.
And you were like, no, we're so close. Like, that would be ridiculous. Like, let's just go, even if it's just like 10 minutes, just drop a few thousand yen, for a drink. And it was completely worth it. First of all, I mean, look at that Miles Davis poster outside. Like, where did they get that? Who commissioned that?
It's enormous too. I mean, it's absolutely huge on that street, right?
And then, again, as we said before, I love myself a good awning, and this one was another great one, Jazz Cafe L. Evans. And then we walked in, and a really, really unique and cool place with those vintage round red speakers, which we've talked about on previous episodes from a couple different places like Meg and Milestone. And then the real surprise, all of the signed posters that they have hanging up in there.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the standard living room lamp in between the speakers. I thought that was going to be the surprise.
No, that is not a surprise. Yes, I mean, we've seen that many times. We've seen that. We've seen the Macintosh amps. I mean, that's okay, yeah, the great.
Yeah, but look at that. But look at that shrine, though. I mean, like before we get onto the posters, look at that. Look at the stuff around the speakers. There's framed family pictures, what looks like. You've got the little HMV dog. You've got jazz musician busts. You've got like a full-on saxophone. Then there's like a double bass tucked behind that lamp.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. And what looks like Henry VIII for some reason in a little
there's like a framed, looks like a framed playing card.
Oh, no. I know what, I think I know what that is. I think I know what that is.
Or?
Yes, that's right, because that's the logo for Nika whiskey. Yeah, that makes sense then. Okay, otherwise it's completely random. But
a couple of Eiffel Towers as well. Why not?
I missed the little guy playing guitar too on the right speaker. I forgot about him. I mean, yeah, just a wonderful hodgepodge there. Yeah, and I mean, we didn't expect this because sometimes they don't necessarily advertise, but as you can see, there's a hi-hat cymbal there set up and a microphone and a mixer, so they do have live gigs just at the back of this long rectangular room. In the middle of a neighborhood that seemingly is completely depressed, with no shops open, and they're still doing some live gigs in there. Now, my notes are not clear. I have some scribbles about a nice lady offered to cook for us, not the owner, no photo with a question mark. So I interpret that to mean that she was working there, but she was not the owner, and therefore she didn't want to get her picture taken. Is that what you remember?
Yeah, you were a few beers in, so I'm not surprised your notes had become scribbles on day 5. But it got a bit complicated if I remember, because I think there was no one else there. So she was surprised, first of all, I think, to have customers. Then I think she
was watching TV when we came in.
Yeah, and trying to make us food, or sort of like, do you want food? And then we said what we were doing. And obviously, again, like you said, with 52, we were at this point where we didn't have time for a long preamble, and we were actually, as I've said, trying to get back to Coltrane, which we knew for a fact closed at 11 p.m. Now, we had called the owner and told him that we'd be coming, so everything was building up towards this return visit to Coltrane, but we also had this 11 o'clock deadline. And when we got to L. Evans, it was around, by this stage, it was already about 8:30, 8:45. So we were on like 2.25 hours sort of time limit at this stage. So we did say to her, I think then she called the owner to sort of say, there's some guys here want to take pictures, and it all got a bit lost in translation. But anyway, we had a drink. We had some, I think I had some nuts actually, which is, it couldn't have been the first nuts of the trip, but
again,
anyway,
not surprising in the least. Yes,
and I managed to snap these photographs. So we were probably there for not much more than, I'd say, a half an hour, 45 minutes. Unfortunately,
I don't even think it was that long. I think it was 25 minutes. I remember I killed a bottle of Kirin Heartland beer in a really short time, which caused a lot of consequences afterwards because, as you mentioned, we had to, race out of there. I think we were really only in there for, I would say 20, 25 minutes.
No, I've got about 45 here, I think. So it was
really?
not an unrespectable amount of time.
Okay, that's not so bad. Yeah, I wonder why did it feel so short? Maybe because we rushed. I guess we ran from the car to there, and then when we came out, we ran back to the parking lot.
We definitely ran back to the car. I remember that very distinctly, running back to the car.
That's right, because, so from Kita Kyushu back to Fukuoka, you get on the highway, it's not so bad, but we were not going to Fukuoka City. We were going to go to Tosu City, which is, about 30 kilometers south, which is where
it's a lot more than that. It's 90 kilometers. It's 90 kilometers from where we were. So actually, from the place that we're going to go next and the final place before the end of the trip, it was a good hour and a quarter. So, we had about 2 hours basically, and we had an hour 15 travel time to make sure that we got to Coltrane. And of course, we had no guarantee. I mean, as we've said previously, these opening hours sometimes are loose, to say the least. So the fact that it says that it closes at 11 p.m., it's an elderly couple. They have no customers in on a Tuesday night. The chances are they're going to close whenever they're tired. So we didn't even have a guarantee that it would still be open. So when we left L. Evans, we dashed back to the car. Now, I had found this place called Fudo, which could just be could have literally just meant food if you were pronouncing it in Japanese. It doesn't mean that, but we weren't sure, and we knew nothing about this place, so it was a real risk. And I suppose we were kind of. We were really taking a gamble here, because potentially if we took a side trip to Fudo on the way to Coltrane, we could have ended up missing Coltrane as well.
Definitely a real gamble. I think, it was risky. It was definitely risky. Didn't know anything about the place. Fudo, the Chinese characters is wind and land, or wind and soil. And the sign that you got a picture of the sign. It leads up these like very dark wooden steps. It's very, very simple, just as jazz blues. Didn't know what we were going to find, and we raced up there. And I don't know, at this point, I mean, I guess we were getting a bit frazzled, but did we even know that it was a bar, or did we think it was a live club? I have no idea what we were expecting, but we walked in and it was just lovely. It reminded me a lot of places like Pithecanthropus erectus in Tokyo, a kind of real old, smoky, dark, wooden jazz bar where they just play a lot of vinyl, no frills at all. And the guy was amazing. He was super, super cool. I wrote it down because his name is quite rare in Japan, his family name. It's Taka Enoki, which is not a name I'd even ever heard before. Really mellow dude. Ordered a Guinness just to be polite, because I didn't think it'd be nice to take the pictures and just run out without ordering something. So I ordered a Guinness. You immediately just jumped around to take the pics. And, we started chatting with him, and he had a super mellow reaction when I told him about the project. He was just kind of like, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good hobby. Sounds good. That was literally all that he said. And you can see from the picture you got, like, that sort of mellowness coming through,
Yeah, I mean, this place is probably the only place where I really feel, slightly guilty. I mean, it's not the worst thing ever, but, we're very conscious that as we document this project and this culture, as we create this project and document this culture, to do it justice. And, my approach as a photographer, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, is very much to go in initially as a jazz fan, as a fan of this culture, and as a customer. And we always order, we always sit there, we have a drink, we get the vibe, and we get chatting and start a conversation, and then we approach the idea of taking pictures. But just purely out of necessity and probably a small degree of panic at this stage, we just kind of thought, well, look, there's no point in messing around here. We really don't have any time. So we did come straight in. Happily, there was no one there at the time. We said, this is what we're doing. And like you say, you had a drink, which I distinctly remember you didn't even finish. Or I think you'd brought it with you, actually, because I remember you standing outside with a bottle of Guinness.
I did. I brought it with me. But you told me not to bring it in the car. So I just started drinking it before.
That's right. That's where the convenience store came in. I had this image of you standing in front of a convenience store necking a drink. That's what it was. So it was the drink
also
from
because
Fudo.
we hadn't eaten for, at least 10 hours. And I think that we were like, okay, look, we've got an hour's drive at least. So we, ran to the convenience store. I ran in to use the bathroom there, obviously. Bought a bunch of snacks, some onigiri, some chips, whatever. I think I bought a banana and just jumped back into the car and raced down the road.
Yeah, you're right. We got some snacks. We were in the car. And by this point, it was basically 9:20. So we had until 11 to get to Coltrane. And as I said, it's about an hour and 15 minutes drive. So we actually have to go through or certainly around the outskirts of Fukuoka City to get south of it to Tosu. So within the confines of the law, obviously, I drove as fast as I could and safely as I could. Also conscious, I suppose, of the fact that it had been a long 5 days. It had been a long fifth day. We hadn't eaten that much. Obviously, I had just been on the coffee, so my heart was probably racing, but I was pretty tired. But amazingly, and I suppose one of the happiest one of the happiest moments of the trip, and certainly a fantastic way to finish on a high. And you'll probably know already if you've looked at the website and if you listened to previous episodes of the podcast that we did, of course, make it to Coltrane. We got there at 10:40, so we basically arrived with 20 minutes to spare. And amazingly, James, first of all, not only was it open, but the owner and his wife were actually sat in there waiting for us, weren't they?
They were waiting for us, and they were so sweet. They immediately asked us, like, was the drive okay? Because we had told them that we were driving from the eastern part of Kyushu. I called them to tell them we'd be running late. We'd already talked to them the day before, when we couldn't get in, when they were closed. So I think that they may have felt a little bit sort of almost, sorry for us because we couldn't have come yesterday at the earlier time. So they were there waiting for us. There was nobody else in the place. And I think, Philip, it's funny because I looked back on my notes about Coltrane, and they weren't very comprehensive because, as you mentioned, we were tired, we were frazzled. I'd been on some beers. It had been a long 5 days, but I don't think anything really prepared me emotionally for what I would have felt walking in here because, like you, I'm a gigantic John Coltrane fan, and this place outdoes even the Church of John Coltrane in San Francisco in terms of its devotion to him. It is nothing less than a temple, almost a museum, but a living museum to John Coltrane and his music. There's nothing like it anywhere else. It's a church, it's a temple, and the sheer number of things. I mean, we're not even just talking. We could spend half an hour talking about his record collection, and you've got a couple great photos of the sort of record booth room that is the style that we found once you leave Tokyo and there's more space. They have a little separate room. But do you remember he took out his notebook to show us all the albums that he actually has, including the bootlegs? And I mean, it's running up into the several hundreds,
Yeah, I mean, it was just. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this podcast. I mean, probably the majority of the podcast is us just gushing about these places that we visited. But I think, this place will always be above and beyond even that. I mean, not only the drama of arriving there, with 20 minutes to spare, but to go into that place. For those of you who haven't either seen the photos yet or haven't been to it yourselves, when you go in, if you turn left, there's a seating area. There's a bar area behind which is this beautifully laid out glass cabinets full of china, which has all been branded with Coltrane's image. And then further down towards the back of the bar area is the sound system and the speakers. And then off to the right is a purpose-built record room. And I mean, it just has the feel of a library. And of course, the owner went in there, he chose some records, and he played it for us. And then came and sat down and had a chat with you as I wandered about and took some photos. And again, I was so conscious, I was listening with one ear, but I'm also conscious that, at some point they're going to close. I mean, these an elderly couple, we've kept them waiting. It's nearly 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. And so I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to photograph this place. But even then, he took the time to talk us through what they've done, talk us through the history. He showed us this absolutely stunning handwritten menu of all the Coltrane albums, which you can see on the website as well. I mean, he had sat down at some point and created these kind of little business cards of Coltrane's albums, and then written out the set list on the other side. And you can see that in the images. It's also something that we've mentioned in some other places where a lot of cafes, of course, would have had like a music menu that you were able to make requests from. And just look at that record collection. I mean,
yes, yeah. I mean, the attention to detail there. The portrait that you got of them. You can kind of see in there. He's a little bit older older than she is. Not unusual for a Japanese couple that would have been married at some point in the 60s. He's probably about 10 years older. He seemed pretty Genki enough, but who knows how long he can run what is a fairly large place. And you just kind of think like this is such a treasure that somewhere, whether it's going to be like Chigusa in Yokohama, where the fans and the customers got together to make a little association to keep it running and to take it over, or whether they've got children who can do that. This is something that for jazz fans just has to be maintained. One quick anecdote about what you mentioned, the dishware, all of which you can see in the portrait of the couple has John Coltrane's face on it. So do all the plates. So do all the ashtrays. I asked them. I said, "Oh, can I please buy a coffee cup?" And I was stunned. I was sure that they would say yes, but they said, "Oh, we're really sorry, but we only have this left. The guy who made them can't make them anymore, so we can't sell any." And I got the feeling from the way she said it, it was sort of like people always ask to buy them.
I'm sure, yeah.
But we do have sweatshirts and T-shirts. So I said,
we do, yeah.
Not a problem. Bought a sweatshirt right away. Still wear it when it's cold up here in Tokyo. Very proud. And I think I might have mentioned this because I believe we did talk about Coltrane a little bit on our introductory episode way back in episode 1. But one day I was on the train here and a guy saw it and he started chatting with me because he knew the place. So, hey, jazz heads unite,
Yeah, I mean, it's we could talk for hours, and I'm sure nobody wants to hear that. But we really could just talk about this place. I mean, I don't know if you remember the little, and again, I'll post this on social media. It's not on the website, but there's a fantastic selection of sort of color-coded matchbooks as well, all featuring Coltrane's face and branded jazz spot Coltrane. There's also, I noticed behind the portrait of them, which I hadn't spotted before, is actually a band called the Blue Trains, who seem to do public rehearsals for people to come visit. I think it's every month on the 15th and the 25th of each month. So obviously some sort of Coltrane-inspired band that come in there to do their rehearsals, and you can come in there, have a coffee, and listen to them play as well. And I suppose as well, I mean, it's worth just mentioning the outside of this place. I mean, you can see from the first photograph on the site the kind of developments that are around them. Fairly sparse. There's a few individual houses here and there. Right across the street from that, there's quite a few large office block apartment-type buildings.
Well, no,
and then in the middle of it, you just have
stadium. There's a soccer stadium.
Soccer stadium, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, there's a soccer stadium right across. That's why there's a train station right across.
Look at the height of it. Look at the height of the building. I mean, it's very unusual to get a single building like that in Japan anyway, that height.
They live upstairs.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
I mean,
astonishing.
look at the mural. Like, did he paint? Did they paint that? Did they hire someone to paint it? Who knows? But I mean, there's simply nothing like Coltrane. We often joke about, picking James's top 10 jazz joints, which is a list of about 35 at the moment, but number one is Coltrane. There's no doubt about it. It's the most precious, most beautiful jazz spot I've ever visited. And it's worth it if you are outside of Japan and you can come here at some point. It's worth flying to Fukuoka, which is a great city anyway, and Kyushu is a great region. But take a day to come visit Coltrane because there is nothing else like it.
It's unmissable. Absolutely unmissable. What was interesting, I suppose, like you say, it's definitely one of the most special places. And I suppose it's ironic because I think in some ways what makes it so special and so memorable, apart from the place itself, is the way that we got there and the nature of that day and how we'd missed it the previous day. And then we finally got to it at the end of this incredibly sort of exciting and exhausting day. But in a way, it's a shame also because it meant as a result, we weren't able to spend that much time. And true to form, this owner, I have to say, as polite and as generous and welcoming as he was, and the fact that they'd waited for us, when it got to sort of 11:15 or so, there was very much a sense of, okay, well, we're closing now, and this is the end of our business hours, and as politely as possible. And we were conscious, obviously, not to impose as well, and made sort of profuse apologies. But I think about sort of 11:30, we were in the car and heading back towards Fukuoka, weren't we?
We were heading back in a completely physically, emotionally, just overwhelmed. I think I had ordered one of those large bottles of Japanese beer in Coltrane and did down that. So you can imagine I was getting a little bit sleepy. You had another coffee, and we drive back into Fukuoka. I don't remember where we parked. Did we go to the hotel? I don't remember what happened after that. All I remember is that we were starving, and it was kind of like that feeling of like, wow, we did it. And all of a sudden the exhaustion and the hunger came in, and we found just a typical sort of Japanese izakaya, but what turned out to be a little bit strange for two reasons. One was that they had a gigantic Japanese taiko drum hanging in there that they would bang on whenever you made an order, which I found rather irritating. And the other thing was that the owner was a local from Kyushu. I could tell by his accent, but the staff there was a couple of Japanese people. The staff were mainly from Nepal, and not something you see very often in a Japanese izakaya. So that memory really stuck out to me. But we sat down, we ordered a bunch of the usual sort of izakaya snacks, some sashimi, some edamame beans, yakitori, grilled chicken. I think I had one last beer, and I believe you ordered some shochu to sort of take the edge off of the caffeine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a little video of us doing a kampai at 12:15. So it was gone midnight by this stage, absolutely exhausted, but totally and utterly fulfilled. And what a way to finish the trip. We did actually just park up near the hotel. I think it was an izakaya quite close to where we were staying.
Yes.
And boy, were we ready to hit the hay at the end of that evening. But what a fantastic way to finish up the day. And, a whole day driving, really, but to take in 7 places, and not only the fact that it was 7 places, but actually 7 incredible and, like, in their own way, completely unmissable joints. It couldn't have been a better way to finish up the 5 days.
Oh, I know, and spread out along what is not an insignificantly small island. I mean, Kyushu Island, a large part of Japan, and we traversed so much of it in just one day. In addition to getting in an onsen visit, pretty amazing. And I mean, I guess it is, it's funny, like you said about Coltrane, that we didn't get the chance to visit it the day before when we would have had more time, maybe not been so tired. But it's certainly kind of fitting that it was the last spot, because how could you move on after that? It was sort of the culmination of everything that we've been trying to do on this crazy, this crazy quest.
Absolutely. And so, we really hope to those of you who are listening, thanks for joining us on this 5 days in June journey that we've been on. We hope you have enjoyed listening to it. We hope that you've felt in some small way that you've been on that trip with us. I can't believe there's anybody now listening to the podcast who doesn't know that all the photographs that accompany the project are on tokyojazzjoints.com. But if you're one of those people, you can't say that anymore. tokyojazzjoints.com. Also, you can follow us on all the social media channels at Tokyo Jazz Joints. And if you want to financially support the project, we still have a long way to go. We estimate probably between 60 and 70 joints still to be visited and documented and added to the project. So if you're keen to help out financially with the project and get us over the line, please get in touch with us either on the website, on any social media platforms, or indeed just tokyojazzjoints@gmail.com. Equally, if you're interested in buying any prints from the project, those are all available for sale. They're all limited edition of 10 or 15, and they're all printed on archival quality paper. So that they'll probably last even longer than you. You can hand those down to your children and your grandchildren and keep that jazz kisa culture alive for many, many decades to come. James, thank you for this trip. Thank you for being my passenger.
Thank
in
you
the
for
car.
doing the driving, and I mean, it was quite an endeavor. I remember when you proposed it, I was just like, man, I don't have a license, and you were like, no problem. I love driving, and I was like, okay. I'll handle the music, not a problem. It was quite the adventure. And listen, man, you got to get back here as soon as you can. And we're going to continue the journey. We're going to do a little bit more in Kyushu. We're going to do a little bit down in Hiroshima and Okayama and Shikoku, and even go to the way cold far north. I've got some stories from a recent adventure that I did here by myself about that, which we'll get to on another episode. But there's still a lot more to check out, buddy. So, as soon as you can.
I'll be there. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks as always to Brian of Grooves Ahead for all the help that he gives us with the sound. Thanks to Louis Lastic for our theme music. Thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. Your support, encouragement helps us keep going. We'll be back with a couple more episodes before we draw a line under the podcast project for the meantime. So thanks again, James. You take it easy, and we'll talk soon.
Talk to you soon, my friend. Bye-bye.
This podcast was produced and created by Philip Arneal and James Catchpole of the Tokyo Jazz Joints Project. Thanks to Brian of Grooves Ahead for audio assistance, and also to Louis Lastic for our theme music.